Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the British Accent Podcast. Today we're diving into something really fascinating: what British English actually reveals about British culture. Because here's the truth: a language isn't just about words and grammar, it's a window into the way people think, interact, and live their lives.
Exactly. And British English is such a great example of that. The moment you start paying attention to expressions, tone, and even how polite or indirect phrases are, you begin to see that the culture behind the language values certain things, like understatement, politeness, and a unique sense of humour.
Right? Think about something as simple as the phrase, "not bad." In many cultures, that would literally mean, just okay, or could be better. But in British English, not bad often means pretty good, sometimes even great. That tells us about the culture's tendency to downplay things rather than exaggerate.
And the way British people use politeness markers, like please, thank you, or sorry, almost excessively compared to other cultures. It's not just about manners, it reflects a deeper cultural value of respect, humility, and consideration for others, even in casual interactions.
Yes, and humour plays a huge role too. British English often carries this layer of irony or sarcasm, sometimes so subtle that it can be tricky for non-natives to catch. But that dry wit reflects the culture's love for understatement and cleverness over being too direct.
And then there's the way speech changes depending on region and class. Accents and vocabulary differences aren't just about language, they reveal history, identity, and even social belonging. For example, the way someone says bath with a shorter or a longer can signal where they are from, and sometimes even what background they have.
I love that point, Nick. Because British English is layered with history. Words borrowed from French after the Norman conquest, or slang that evolved from working-class communities in London, all tell stories about migration, social change, and cultural blending.
So when you learn British English, you're not just learning vocabulary, you're learning how the culture views modesty, humour, politeness, and identity. And that makes studying the language so much richer and more meaningful.
And if you think about how British people often soften their statements, that's another cultural reflection. Instead of saying, "you're wrong," someone might say, "I'm not sure that's quite right." It's not just about being indirect, it's about keeping harmony in the conversation.
Exactly. And even something as small as using a bit changes the tone. Saying it's cold versus it's a bit cold completely shifts the feeling. The second one is gentler, less absolute, and that tells you something about how British communication avoids sounding too strong or harsh.
Then there's the famous British tendency to apologize. Saying sorry when someone else bumps into you, or when you just want to get past someone in a shop. It shows how deeply embedded this idea of consideration is. It's almost like a cultural reflex.
And we can't forget humour again. It's everywhere, in workplaces, in daily chats, even in serious moments. Often, a British person will use humour as a way to lighten the atmosphere, to connect, or to handle awkwardness. That self-deprecating style, making fun of yourself before anyone else can, is really telling about the culture's relationship with humility.
Also, idioms and metaphors reveal a lot. For instance, phrases like "keep a stiff upper lip" or "don't make a fuss" highlight values like resilience and modesty. The language encourages people to stay composed, not to overreact, which reflects broader cultural attitudes.
And regional slang adds another layer. Words like cheers, which can mean thank you, or goodbye, or mate, which creates instant friendliness, show how British English builds community and connection through language.
Even tea-related expressions say so much. Saying "fancy a cuppa" isn't just an offer of tea, it's an invitation to pause, connect, and share time together. That small phrase carries a whole cultural ritual inside it.
And then there's the class aspect of language in Britain, which is fascinating. Certain words, accents, and even pronunciation choices have historically been linked to social class. For example, the so-called posh accent received pronunciation was once considered a marker of education and status, while regional accents were sometimes unfairly judged.
Yes, but what's beautiful now is that regional accents are gaining more visibility and respect. You hear Scouse, Geordie, Brummie, and so many others on television and radio. It reflects a cultural shift, an acceptance that identity and diversity matter more than rigid hierarchies.
That's so true. And even within vocabulary, you see those differences. Some people might say sofa, others say couch, or even settee. It's not just about words, it's about heritage, upbringing, and sometimes even regional pride.
And food vocabulary is another big giveaway. Think about dinner, tea, and supper. Depending on where you are in the UK, tea could mean an evening meal, or just a hot drink. It shows how language reflects daily life patterns and traditions.
Weather talk too, it's like a national pastime. The fact that there are so many polite ways to comment on the weather reflects not only how changeable the British climate is, but also how conversation works as a tool for connection. It's not about the weather, it's about creating a safe space for interaction.
Yes, it's almost like weather talk is the cultural equivalent of a handshake, polite, neutral, and universally understood.
And humour, let's not forget humour. British English carries this unique sense of understatement, irony, and sarcasm that's deeply cultural. If someone says, not bad, it could mean, really good. If they say, interesting, it might mean they don't agree at all.
Exactly. And that kind of indirectness is so telling of the culture. Instead of being direct, the language often softens things, making communication less confrontational. Even the phrase, "I'm not sure that's quite right," might actually mean, "You're absolutely wrong."
And politeness markers are everywhere. Sorry is probably one of the most used words in British English, but it doesn't always mean an apology. It can mean, excuse me, could you repeat that, or even, you're in my way.
Right, and the word, cheers too. It's not just for raising a glass, it's also thank you, goodbye, and sometimes even a casual acknowledgement between strangers. That flexibility shows how British English reflects social bonding.
I also think about self-deprecating humour. Brits often use it in conversations, saying things like, oh, I'm terrible at that, even when they're quite skilled. It's a cultural way of staying humble, not appearing arrogant, and making others feel comfortable.
And that ties to modesty in language as a cultural trait. Instead of boasting, British English often tones things down, like saying quite good instead of excellent. It's about restraint, but also about letting actions speak louder than words.
Another fascinating part is the way British English preserves history through idioms. Take raining cats and dogs. It sounds bizarre today, but it comes from old times when heavy rain would flood streets and animals might be seen washed away. The phrase stuck, and now it's cultural heritage carried in everyday speech.
Yes, and idioms also show regional roots. In the north, you might hear, "I'm chuffed to bits," meaning, I'm really happy, while in the south, people might just say, "I'm pleased." Each choice of words reflects geography, identity, and community.
And accents too, they're a huge cultural marker. A Londoner's Cockney rhyming slang is completely different from someone speaking in received pronunciation, which used to be seen as the prestige accent. The way people talk reveals class, education, and sometimes even attitudes.
Absolutely, and those cultural associations still influence perceptions today. Even if British society is less class-obsessed than before, language carries traces of it. The way someone pronounces certain vowels can hint at where they grew up, their background, and sometimes how others respond to them.
That's why British English is more than just words, it's a mirror of values like politeness, understatement, history, humour, and even social structure. It reflects a whole way of life, embedded in how people choose to communicate every single day.
And humour, of course, is one of the biggest cultural reflections in British English. The British love irony, sarcasm, and self-deprecation. When someone says, "Well, that went brilliantly," right after a disaster, it's not confusion, it's cultural humor at work.
Exactly, and that can be hard for learners to pick up. What sounds like sincerity is often a playful jab. It's why outsiders sometimes misread British politeness or humour. It's layered, subtle, and often not meant to be taken literally.
Even small talk reflects culture. Talking about the weather isn't just about clouds or sunshine, it's a safe entry point to connect with strangers. It shows the cultural value of gentle social bonding without diving into personal topics too quickly.
And the avoidance of direct confrontation shows up in the language too. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," a British person might say, "I'm not sure I quite agree." The phrasing reflects cultural tendencies toward diplomacy and respect for face saving.
It's fascinating, because once you understand these patterns, you're not just learning words, you're learning how a society thinks, how it relates to others, and how it preserves identity through its language.
And it also shows how British English is tied to history. For example, so many idioms come from naval traditions, farming, or even the Industrial Revolution. When someone says, "learn the ropes," or "full steam ahead," that's history embedded in everyday speech.
Yes, and another thing is the way British English preserves older forms. Words like fortnight, or cheers in the sense of thank you, are still alive in the UK, even though they're rarely used elsewhere. It's like a living museum of culture, with certain expressions carrying traditions forward.
That's true. Even spelling tells a cultural story. British English holds onto French influences, colour, theatre, analyse, while American English simplified many of those. So the spelling isn't just academic, it reflects cultural attitudes toward heritage and practicality.
And the accents too, regional variations aren't just about sound. They carry social and cultural signals, sometimes even class identity. For example, received pronunciation has historically been linked to education and status, while regional accents proudly signal local belonging and community.
Which again, reminds us that British English is more than just communication. It's culture, history, identity, all encoded into the way people speak every single day.
And think about humor, too. British English has this dry, understated humor that shows up in phrases like not bad, when actually someone means really good, or brilliant being used casually for something small. It reflects a cultural tendency to downplay emotions rather than exaggerate them.
Exactly, understatement is huge in British culture. If someone says, "it's a bit chilly," it might actually be freezing outside. Or if they say, "I'm not too keen on it," they probably really dislike it. The language mirrors that cultural habit of being polite and reserved.
And politeness itself is interesting. British English has so many layers of indirectness. Would you mind possibly? Or I was just wondering if you might. It's not just about being careful with words. It's about a cultural emphasis on respect, space, and not imposing.
Yes, and that's something learners of English sometimes find confusing. They might think British people are being vague, when in fact it's just a cultural habit to soften requests and avoid sounding too direct.
Another thing we can see is how class and society shape the language. For example, the difference between posh English, sometimes called received pronunciation, and more regional accents. The way someone speaks in Britain can sometimes immediately tell you about their background, where they grew up, or even what kind of school they went to.
Right, and it's not just about pronunciation, but also word choice. Some people might say sofa, while others say settee, or one group says dinner for the evening meal while another says tea. Those differences reveal social history, migration, and local traditions that are embedded in the culture.
It's fascinating how those subtle differences can spark conversations. Even a simple phrase like, "you all right," which in British English often just means, hello, shows how culture and language are intertwined. It's not literally about checking on your health, it's a cultural greeting.
Yes, and I think it also shows how British culture values understatement and informality in everyday interactions. Instead of a big enthusiastic greeting, it's more like a relaxed check-in.
And if we think about humor, British English reveals so much about the national character. The use of irony, sarcasm, and understatement is deeply cultural. For instance, if someone says not bad, they might actually mean that was excellent. Outsiders sometimes misunderstand this because they take the words literally, but culturally, understatement is a kind of polite modesty.
Exactly. And British people often make jokes that downplay their own achievements or struggles. That's not because they don't value themselves, but because culturally, there's an appreciation for humility and for not taking things too seriously. Language carries that identity. Phrases like, could be worse, or, it's fine, often mean much more than they sound on the surface.
There's also the politeness factor. British English tends to wrap requests, or refusals in soft, indirect forms. Instead of saying, close the window, someone might say, would you mind closing the window, if it's not too much trouble. That extra layer of words reveals a culture that prioritizes being considerate and non-confrontational.
Yes, and even the way sorry is used, sometimes 10 times in a short conversation, tells us a lot. People apologize not only for mistakes but even just for existing in someone else's way. It shows that social harmony and avoiding awkwardness are highly valued in British culture.
So when we really listen to British English, we don't just hear a collection of words and accents, we hear values like politeness, humour, understatement, and social balance.
Exactly. The language is like a mirror of the culture itself. Every bit of irony, every polite phrase reveals the British way of relating to the world.
And the beautiful part is, by learning and paying attention to these subtleties, we don't just improve our English, we also understand the people and the culture behind it more deeply.
Which makes learning a language so much more than memorizing vocabulary. It's about stepping into another way of life.
Thanks for joining us in this conversation. We hope this helped you see how culture is hidden in every word of British English.
And we can't wait to explore more ideas with you in our next episode.